They stood in my living room and told me I had contributed nothing. My mother-in-law said it with a straight face, her hands folded in her lap like she was reading from a script she had rehearsed 100 times. My husband sat beside her and said nothing. He just looked at the floor. And in that moment, 11 years of cooking, cleaning, working, saving, quietly holding that family together from the inside out collapsed into a silence so loud I could not breathe. 3 days later, I found the account. And everything I thought I understood about my marriage, my husband, and where all our money had gone suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I am not a dramatic person. I do not scream. I do not make scenes. I am the kind of woman who cries in the car and then walks back inside and makes dinner. I stayed in that marriage longer than I should have because I kept telling myself that things would change, that he would see me, that eventually the people who were supposed to love me would remember that love is a verb. It took finding a bank statement with a balance that made my hands shake to finally understand that the problem was never a communication issue. The problem was a choice, a deliberate, years-long choice. And once I understood that, I made some choices of my own. Before I keep going, I need to ask you something because this story is going to get complicated and I need to know you are with me. If you found out that the person who shared your bed, your home, your life had been quietly building a second financial world that you were never meant to see, what would you do first? Would you confront them or would you go very, very quiet? Tell me in the comments because the answer says everything about how this ends. Stay with me. My name is Maya and I was married for 11 years to a man I will call Daniel. I want to be careful here because this story is still legally active in certain ways and because I believe the truth speaks better than names. But I also want to be specific enough that you understand this was not a vague, emotional unhappiness. This was a system, a structured, deliberate arrangement that I was not supposed to figure out until it was too late. Daniel and I met when I was 26. He was warm and funny, and he made me feel like the most important person in every room. We married after 2 years of dating, and for the first 3 years of our marriage, things were genuinely good. We both worked. We saved together. We talked about the future like it was something we were building side by side. Then his mother moved closer. I want to be careful about how I say this, because I do not believe that loving your mother is a character flaw. But what happened with Daniel and his family was not love. It was loyalty to a system where I was always going to be at the bottom of the hierarchy, and nobody thought to mention that to me before I signed the certificate. His mother, Renata, was a woman who used kindness as a currency. She would give you a warm smile and a compliment and then remind you of both the next time she needed something. She ran her household, even as a guest in ours, like she was the host. She rearranged my kitchen twice in the first month she stayed with us. She told Daniel within earshot of me that I did not know how to cook his food the right way. She criticized how I dressed, how I kept the house, how I spent money. And every single time, Daniel would give me a small apologetic look and then say nothing to her. I excused it for a long time. I told myself she was adjusting. I told myself she was lonely. I told myself Daniel was caught in the middle. But here is the thing about excuses, they have a way of running out. The first time I noticed money was strange was in our 4th year of marriage. We had been saving for a house. We had a joint account and every month we were both contributing. Daniel handled most of the household finances because he said it was easier since he worked in accounting and he understood the structures. I had my own small account for personal expenses, but the big account, the house fund, was supposed to be ours. One evening I asked to see the balance. Just casually over dinner, I said I wanted to track how close we were getting to our down payment goal. Daniel said he would pull it up later. Later never came, and the next morning when I asked again, he showed me a number on his phone screen so quickly that I barely had time to read it. I only caught that the number was much lower than what I had calculated it should be given what we had been depositing each month. When I asked about the difference, he said there had been some fees, some investment movements. He would explain it properly later. Later again, I let it go. I am telling you this not to make myself sound foolish, but to show you how the architecture of this kind of deception works. It does not come at you all at once. It arrives in small, dismissible fragments that each seem like they might have a reasonable explanation. In our 5th year, Daniel's brother Marcus had a financial crisis. I never got the full details, but I understood that Marcus had made some bad business decisions and was in danger of losing his home. Daniel came to me with a very caring expression and said he thought we should help. He said family was important. He said Marcus would pay it back. He gave me a figure. It was not small. It was $30,000. I asked if we had that kind of money available without touching our house savings. Daniel said yes. He said he had it handled. I agreed to help Marcus because I genuinely believed in helping family and because I trusted my husband. The money went out. Marcus never mentioned paying it back, not once in the 6 years that followed. And the house savings, I would later find out, had already been half emptied before that conversation ever happened. There is something that happens to you when you live inside a deception you do not yet understand. You start to feel like you're going slightly crazy. You have these small, nagging feelings. A number does not add up. A reaction does not match a situation. Someone looks away at exactly the wrong moment. But because you love the person and because you have built a life around the assumption of their honesty, you work very hard to explain those feelings away. You gaslight yourself before anyone else has to. I did that for years. I explained away the distance that grew between Daniel and me by telling myself it was just stress. I explained away Renata's increasing comfort in our home by telling myself I was being too sensitive. I explained away the vague, evasive answers to financial questions by telling myself I did not understand money as well as Daniel did. And then something happened that I could not explain away. In our 8th year of marriage, my father passed. He had been ill for a while, and his death, though not a shock, broke something open in me that I did not know had been closed. He was a quiet, principled man. He did not leave a large estate, but he had a small property, a piece of land outside the city, and a savings account with a moderate amount in it. He left it all to me, only me. I was his only child. The lawyer called me on a Thursday morning. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my office and cried for a long time after I hung up. Then I went inside and did my work because that is what I do. I did not tell Daniel the exact figures right away. I was grieving. I needed time. But I did tell him that my father had left me something. I told him it included some land and some savings. Daniel hugged me and said he was sorry for my loss and that we would figure out the details together when I was ready. I should have paid more attention to the word together. 2 weeks later, Daniel sat me down with a very gentle expression and said that he had been thinking about our financial situation and that he really thought the best move was to consolidate. He used that word specifically. Consolidate. He said it would simplify things, reduce fees, make planning easier. He said it made sense to put the inheritance into our joint structure so we could grow it together. He had a document ready. It was a financial form of some kind. He explained it in terms I mostly followed, but not entirely. And he was so calm and reassuring that I felt like questioning it would be making a big deal out of nothing. I did not sign it that day. Something in me pulled back. I told him I needed a little more time. He smiled and said, "Of course. I want you to hold on to that moment because it is the moment I came closest to saving myself early, and I still almost missed it." Over the next few weeks, Daniel mentioned the consolidation idea 4 more times. Each time was casual, each time was framed as something that would benefit us, but the repetition started to feel like pressure wearing a patient face. And one night, lying in the dark, I thought about my father. I thought about how he had always told me that when something feels like it is being pushed, you should find out why. So I called a lawyer, a woman I had met through a colleague, someone I trusted. I asked her to look at the document Daniel had asked me to sign. I did not tell Daniel I was doing this. I told myself it was just due diligence. The lawyer called me back 2 days later with a tone in her voice I had not expected. She said the document as written would have transferred full control of my inherited assets into a joint account that Daniel had sole signatory authority over. She said it was written in a way that most non-lawyers would read as a simple consolidation form but was actually a transfer of control. She said if I had signed it, the assets would legally have been subject to his decisions without my consent. I sat very still for a long time after that call. I did not confront Daniel, not yet. I was too aching and too unsure of how much I actually knew. Instead, I asked the lawyer what I should do. She told me to learn as much as I could before I showed my hand. She told me to be quiet and careful. She told me that the worst thing I could do at this point was tip him off before I had a clear picture. I am a person who likes to be direct. Silence felt like dishonesty to me, but I understood what she was saying, and for the first time in my marriage, I listened to someone other than my instinct to keep the peace. I opened my own private account, I transferred the inheritance into it, I hired the lawyer formally, and then I started paying attention in a way I never had before. What I found over the next 4 months was not what I expected. I had been bracing for one big ugly secret. What I found instead was a pattern. A quiet, long-running pattern that had been in place almost since the beginning of our marriage. Daniel had a second account, not secret in the criminal sense, but secret in the practical sense. It was in his name only. I had no access to it, had never been told it existed, and would never have found it if the lawyer had not advised me to request full financial disclosure documentation through a process I did not know existed. The balance in that account was substantial, far more than anything in our shared finances. It had been receiving regular deposits for years. Some of those deposits matched dates when we had made transfers out of our joint account, not all of them, but enough. There was more. The lawyer found that Daniel had taken out a loan against our marital home, a home I had contributed to buying and maintaining without my knowledge. The loan proceeds had gone into his private account. Legally, this was a serious problem for him. Practically, it meant that the home we lived in carried a debt I had not agreed to and had not been told about. I want to pause here because I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking that I should have been more involved in our finances from the beginning. And you are right, I know that now, but I also want to say this. When someone you love and trust tells you they have it handled, when they explain things patiently and use the right words and always have a reason and always have a document, and when you are working full-time and managing a household and grieving a parent and trying to be a good wife, you can miss things. You are not stupid. You are busy, and you are trusting, and some people know exactly how to use that trust as a tool. By the time I had a full picture, I had been living with this man for 11 years, and I understood that approximately 6 of those years had involved some level of financial manipulation. The first few years had been real or real enough, and that honestly was the part that hurt the most. Not that it had always been a lie, but that it had become one slowly while I was too close to see it. I need to tell you about the dinner, because the dinner is what finally broke the careful, patient silence I had been keeping. Daniel's family had a tradition of monthly dinners, usually at Renata's apartment, sometimes at ours. These dinners had always been slightly uncomfortable for me, but I attended them because that is what you do when you are trying to be a good family member. A few months into my quiet information gathering, one of these dinners turned into something I had not been prepared for. Renata had decided that this dinner was the appropriate occasion to discuss what she called the family financial plan. I did not know what that meant until I sat down and saw that Daniel's brother Marcus was there, and Marcus's wife, and Daniel's cousin Petra, who I barely knew, and there was a printed agenda on the table. The agenda outlined a proposal for a family property investment. They wanted to pool money to purchase land and build a multi-unit structure that the family would own collectively. The numbers on the agenda were significant, and at the bottom of the agenda, under a column labeled contributions next to Daniel's name, was a figure that came from my inheritance. My father's money. Money that had been in my private account and which Daniel had no right to include in any plan without my knowledge. I cannot fully describe what it felt like to sit at that table and see my father's legacy listed as a line item in a family plan I had never been consulted about, by a family that had spent years treating me as a pleasant inconvenience. Renata began explaining the plan. She looked at me warmly and said she was so glad I had come around to the idea of contributing. She said it was good to finally see me investing in the family. She said Daniel had assured them I was on board. I looked at Daniel, he was looking at the table again. I said very calmly that I was not aware I had agreed to anything. There was a pause, Renata's smile tightened. She said Daniel had discussed it with me. I said that was not accurate. Another P. Marcus cleared his throat. Petra looked at her hands. Daniel said quietly that we had talked about it. I said we had not. He said he thought we had an understanding. I said we did not. The dinner ended badly, not with screaming, just with a cold, terrible politeness that felt worse than any argument. Renata walked me to the door with her hand on my elbow and said in a voice so sweet it made my skin crawl that she hoped I was not going to be difficult, that this was a family matter, that she had always hoped I would learn to be more of a team player. I got in my car and I sat for a very long time. Then I called my lawyer. The next phase of my life was the one I had been building toward without knowing it. My lawyer had advised me to begin formal separation proceedings before Daniel could make any moves with the shared assets. We had already documented the undisclosed account, the unauthorized loan against the property, and the attempt to solicit my signature on the control transfer document. These were not small things. These were things that had legal weight. I want to be clear that I did not want to go to war. That is genuinely not who I am. What I wanted, what I had always wanted, was honesty. What I wanted was a partner. What I wanted was to feel like a person, not an asset to be managed. But the time for wanting those things had passed. Now I needed protection. I engaged a divorce attorney in addition to my financial lawyer. They worked together on my behalf. The process moved quietly for about 3 weeks while I continued to live in the house, continued to go to work, continued to have dinner with my husband like things were normal. That was one of the hardest things I have ever done, not because I was acting, but because Daniel was also acting and I could see it now, and the performance was suddenly visible in a way it had never been before. He was attentive during those 3 weeks, almost suspiciously so. He brought flowers once. He suggested we take a weekend trip. He talked about the future in warm, vague terms. I think he sensed something had shifted and he was trying to recalibrate. I responded with a kind of neutral warmth that I had learned from years of managing his mother, and I said nothing that gave anything away. The morning I had chosen for service fell on a Tuesday. Daniel had a meeting that he had mentioned would keep him at the office until early evening. I spent the morning at my lawyer's office finalizing documents. I was home by lunch. The papers were served to Daniel at his office at 2 in the afternoon. I found out later that he sat very still after the process server left, that he did not make a call for almost 20 minutes. I know this because one of his colleagues, a woman who had always been kind to me and who had slowly realized over the years what kind of person she worked for, told me afterward. Daniel came home that evening and walked into the kitchen where I was making tea. He set the papers on the counter between us. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen before, not angry, not guilty, something more complicated than either of those. He said, "You actually did this." I said, "Yes." He asked if we could talk. I said there was nothing to talk about that our lawyers could not handle better. He said he thought we could work this out between us. I said the time for that was years ago. He said he had made mistakes. I said I agreed, he said he loved me, and that one I had no response for at all, not because it hurt, but because I realized with a clarity I had never had before that love without honesty is not love, it is performance. And I was done being part of the audience. The legal process was not fast and it was not easy. Daniel initially contested several of the financial findings. His lawyer argued that the private account had been a legitimate personal savings vehicle. My lawyer presented the evidence of deposits that matched joint account withdrawals. His lawyer argued the unauthorized loan had been a miscommunication. My lawyer presented the paperwork that showed my name had been left off the loan application, which was a separate legal problem for Daniel entirely. Renata called me twice during this period. The first call was the angry one. She told me I was destroying her family. She told me I had always been selfish. She told me that I had never truly loved Daniel, that I had only ever been in it for what I could get. It was a remarkable speech given everything I now knew, and I let her finish it completely before I said very quietly that my lawyers had advised me not to discuss the case with third parties and ended the call. The second call came 2 months later. Her tone was different, softer. She said she was worried about Daniel. She said the situation was harder on him than I knew. She said she hoped I still had some goodness in my heart. She said maybe there was a way to come to a private agreement that would be better for everyone. I told her again that my lawyers handled my communications on this matter. She said I was being cold. I told her I had learned from someone who was very good at it. That was not my finest moment, but it was honest. The financial settlement was finalized after 14 months of legal proceedings. Because of the unauthorized loan and the undisclosed account, both of which were documented clearly enough that Daniel's legal team ultimately advised him not to fight them aggressively, the settlement was significantly in my favor. I kept my inherited assets in full. I received a portion of the equity in the home that reflected my financial contributions to it over the years. The private account was factored into the asset division in a way that my lawyer described as appropriate given the circumstances. I want to be honest with you about what the outcome felt like. It did not feel like victory, not the way I had imagined victory might feel in the dark, sleepless hours when I was first processing all of this. It felt more like arriving at the end of a very long road that had taken everything out of me to walk. There was relief, there was exhaustion. There was a grief that I had not expected, for the marriage I thought I had, for the years I had spent believing in something that had been, at least in part, a fiction. But underneath all of that, there was something quiet and solid, something I had not felt in a very long time. It felt like being able to breathe in my own space. I moved into an apartment that was completely my own for the first time in my adult life. It was smaller than the house. It had old fixtures and one window in the bedroom that overlooked a parking structure. I painted the living room a color that Daniel would have said was too bold. I bought a couch that I chose entirely by myself. I slept in the middle of the bed. And slowly, carefully, I started rebuilding. The inheritance my father had left me was now fully protected and properly invested with the help of a financial advisor I trusted. My own income, which I had always had and which I had been quietly contributing to the household for 11 years, was now entirely mine to direct. I was not wealthy, but I was stable, and stable felt like a miracle. About 4 months after the settlement, Marcus reached out to me, not through a lawyer, through a text message to my personal number. He said he had been thinking and he felt bad about how things had gone. He said he wanted me to know he had always respected me. He said he hoped I was doing okay. I stared at that message for a long time. Marcus had never in 11 years gone out of his way to make me feel respected. He had never repaid the $30,000. He had sat at that dinner table while his mother talked about my father's money like it was a family resource and said nothing. He had watched his brother treat me as a financial management problem rather than a wife and said nothing. I did not respond to Marcus. I wish I could tell you I felt powerful not responding. Mostly I just felt tired of the whole thing. Petra, the cousin, actually wrote me a letter, a physical letter on real paper mailed to my lawyer's address, which then forwarded it to me. She said she had observed things over the years that had bothered her. She said she was not in a position to speak up at the time. She said she was sorry for that. She said she hoped I found peace. I read that letter 3 times. I believed her. I also knew that her being not in a position to speak up was not the same as there being no position from which she could have. But I believed the apology was real. I wrote her back briefly and said I appreciated her reaching out. That felt like the right amount of the door to leave open. Daniel himself did not contact me after the settlement was complete. His lawyer's communication to my lawyer had been that he wished to close this chapter. I respected that, not because it made me feel good, but because it was cleaner than the alternative. What he did do, which I heard about through completely separate channels, was tell people in our social circle that I had changed, that the woman they had known had become someone he did not recognize, that stress and grief had made me a different person, that he had tried everything. I heard this and I thought, yes, I did change. I changed into someone who stopped accepting a fiction as a life. I want to tell you about the 6 months after the settlement because I think this part matters more than the legal proceedings. I think the inside of survival is more important than the outside of it. I went back to therapy. I had done therapy briefly years ago but had let it drop during the marriage, partly because I was busy and partly, I can now see, because Daniel had expressed in subtle ways that he found the idea of me discussing our private life with a stranger uncomfortable. My new therapist was a woman with an office full of plants and a very direct way of asking questions that I needed badly. In those sessions, I started to understand something about myself that I had not wanted to look at. I had not been entirely blind to what was happening in my marriage. There had been moments across those 11 years where I had seen something, felt something, known something on some level that I then chose not to pursue, not because I was weak, but because the cost of knowing had felt too high. The cost of unraveling a life I had built and believed in had felt impossible. And so I had gotten very good at the particular skill of not quite looking directly at a problem. My therapist did not let me use this as a reason to be angry at myself. She said it was a very human response to an impossible situation. She said the point was not to punish myself for what I had tolerated, but to understand what I would no longer accept and why, so I could carry that forward. I carried it forward. The professional part of my life had continued throughout all of this. I had been working in project management for a pharmaceutical company for 7 years. My work had actually been a steadying force during the marriage chaos because it was a space where I was genuinely competent and valued and where no one was managing my perception of myself. In the year after my settlement, I got a promotion. I was not looking for it. I had simply kept doing the work well and the organization noticed. The promotion meant a higher salary, more responsibility, and a small team that reported to me. It also meant I was busier than I had ever been. Good busy. The kind of busy that filled a space inside you rather than emptying it. About 8 months after the divorce was final, a colleague introduced me to a woman who ran a small nonprofit focused on financial literacy for women in difficult circumstances. She had heard, through a very indirect chain of mutual connections, that I had some experience with financial deception in a marriage and that I might be interested in speaking at one of their workshops. I almost said no. I did not think of myself as someone whose story was useful to others. I still thought of it in some private corner of myself as a failure I had barely survived. I said yes. The workshop was in a rented room at a community center on a Saturday morning. There were 16 women in the folding chairs. They were different ages and from different places. Some of them looked tired in a very specific way I recognized immediately. I stood at the front of that room and I talked about what had happened to me, not every detail, but the structure of it, the gradual erosion, the financial documents I had not read carefully enough, the apologies I had accepted for the same behavior repeated across years, the moment I stopped accepting, the process of recovery. When I finished, 3 women came up to me. One of them was crying. She said she had been telling herself for 2 years that she was overreacting. She said hearing it described as a system, not a feeling, was the first thing that had made sense to her in a long time. I drove home from that community center and sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building and cried for a while. And then I went inside and called the nonprofit coordinator and said I would come back anytime she needed me. I have now spoken at 6 of those workshops. Each one is different. Each one costs me something emotionally that takes a few days to recover from. I do them anyway, because I think about the woman I was when I was in that room alone trying to explain to myself why a number on a phone screen had seemed wrong. And I think about what it would have meant to hear someone say, "You're not crazy, this is real, you can get out, you can build something after." The last thing I want to tell you is about a morning about a year and a half after the divorce. I was in my apartment making coffee. The sun was doing something interesting with the light on the far wall. My cat, who I had adopted 6 weeks after moving in and who was the small orange person who had probably done more for my mental health than any other single factor, was sitting on the windowsill being very serious about something in the parking structure below. I was not thinking about Daniel. I was not thinking about Renata or Marcus or the loan or the account or the 14 months of legal proceedings. I was thinking about a proposal I needed to finish for work and whether the weekend farmer's market would have the specific tomatoes I needed for a recipe I was planning to try. And I realized quietly with the coffee in my hand and the cat on the sill and the light doing its thing that I was okay. Not healed in the sense that none of it had happened, not rebuilt in the sense that everything was perfect, but okay in the real sense, steady, present myself. That is the best revenge, I think, not the legal settlement, not the vindication of the documents, not even the moment Daniel's lawyer backed down from a position they had tried to hold for 6 months. The best revenge is the morning when you make coffee and you are okay, when the room is yours, when the light is ordinary and the cat is serious and the future is a recipe you are thinking about trying, when you have come so far through so much that the people who tried to erase you are not even a footnote in your actual morning. That is what survival looks like from the inside. That is what I built when they said I had contributed nothing. You made it to the end of Maya's story, then you already understand something important. The people who called her worthless were counting on her silence. They needed her to stay confused, to stay grateful for just enough, to stay too tired to look too closely. The moment she looked clearly was the moment everything changed. And the moment she was okay, just ordinary okay, on an ordinary morning, was the moment they had already lost. If this story touched something in you, if something felt familiar, I would like you to leave a comment below. Tell me the moment you started paying attention. Tell me what made you look. And if you are still in the middle of it, tell me what you need to hear.